Chapter 7. Samson. Nothing was ever to be the same again after father left. I basked briefly in the reflecting glory of a father figure fighting in the war, but the void he left behind him grew wider and deeper as time passed. The glory soon faded as it always does, and when other fathers went off to the war, I found I was no longer even very special. At first, we did manage well enough on our own, Mother and I. She insisted everything had to go on just as before. One day soon, she told me, any day now, your father will come in through that gate and up the path, and I want him to find everything just as he left it. Meanwhile, we have to live, don't we? So to that end, she toiled all day and every day, working up the fields and planting, bringing in the seaweed to dress the flower pieces, and often going out lobster fishing alone in the boat whilst I was at school. I begged to be allowed to stay away from school to help, but perhaps she suspected my reasons were not entirely unselfish, for she would never hear of it. She sent me off to school every day that summer, so I had to endure Mr. Well-Beloved, whether I liked it or not. And I left Mother behind to do both her work in the house and Father's work outside, all on her own. There was less time than ever now to go visiting the Birdman and Prince, and no time at all to sail our boats on the pond. The boats gathered dust and cobwebs in the back of Daniel's boat shed, and when Daniel was not helping us out in the fields, and he often did, he went by himself to the cottage on Heathy Hill. I tried to console myself with the thought that at least I would not have to milk those horrible goats, but there was little enough comfort in that. I missed Prince and I missed the Birdman. Each time I saw Daniel go off alone, I longed to go with him, but I knew I could not. My place was at home now alongside my mother, so I stayed behind. As summer passed into autumn, Mother became ill. The long hours of work in the fields and out in the boat were taking their toll on her strength, and her cough settled on her chest and forced her to stay indoors in the warm. I could see her back was troubling her as well. She found it difficult even to let herself down into her chair at the end of the day. She tried to disguise it from me, of course, but she could not. Only Father's letters, infrequent and brief as they always were, seemed to brighten her day and keep her from despair. She would read them aloud to me over and over again, and then put them up on the mantel-shelf over the stove beside the Birdman's cormorant I had given them for Christmas. I often noticed that she would look up at them during the long dark evenings as if she were trying to draw strength from them. It was on those rare happy days when Mother had just received a letter and when all the work was done that I felt I could leave her and go up to the Birdman's cottage with Daniel like we used to. Whenever I went there now, the Birdman would greet me like a long-lost friend, sitting me down on the edge of his bed by the fire and feeding me a great feast, a cup of warm goat's milk, and all the bread and honey I could eat, and I could eat plenty. Every mouthful seemed to give him as much pleasure as it gave me, if that were possible. He would sit opposite me in his chair, nodding and smiling until I had finished every last crumb. I remember that kittiwake on his shoulder, watching me enviously with his beady sideways eye. I did not care for that bird, and I could tell from the way he looked at me that the feeling was mutual. I would suck the honey deliberately, noisily, off my fingers, so that the kittiwake would know what he was missing. The Birdman was as good as his word. He was indeed a father to me, looking after Mother and me like some anonymous guardian angel. Often, first thing in the morning when Mother went down to open the door, she would find a loaf of bread on the doorstep, or perhaps some eggs or potatoes or milk, and occasionally a huge jar of honey. Manna from heaven, she would say, dipping her little finger into the jar and licking it. Manna from heaven. People are so kind, but we can't live on charity, Gracie. Your father wouldn't like that, would he? Wouldn't be fitting. I longed to tell Mother who our benefactor was, but I dared not for fear she would forbid me from ever going to see him again. I often tried to thank the Birdman for his kindness, but either he pretended not to understand, or he seemed to sense that what I was about to say, and would turn away and ignore me. In the end, I had to write it down on paper for him and make him read it. Thanks for the honey, I wrote in big letters and drew a swarm of bees over the top. He smiled at me. Thank the bees, he said. Thanks for the eggs. Thank the hens, he replied. Thanks for the milk. Thank Betsy and Bertha, he replied, and I made a face at that and held my nose. Thanks for the bread, I wrote. Thank God for that, he said. Daniel would bring us back the occasional fish he had caught off the rocks at Droppy Nose Point, so thanks to the two of them, we never went hungry, Mother and I. But winter was coming on, and Mother was worried, and it was not just about whether we would have enough food to last. It's the money, Gracie, she confessed to me one night, lying beside me in bed. We had taken to sleeping in the same bed since Father left. Your father sends me all he can, but £1.10 a month just isn't enough. I had to buy in seed potatoes and bulbs this year, and then there were those repairs to the boat. I've got to keep the boat going, Gracie, for your father when he gets back. And the lobster catch was poor for everyone this year. The few I did manage to catch, no one wanted to buy. There's no market for them now. It's the war, I suppose, Grace. I suppose. Oh, Gracie, how I hate this war for what it's doing to us all. And then there's still the rent to pay. I could manage if only I was strong enough to go out and do a bit of fishing. A few good catches a month and a bit of luck, and I could sell enough fish to bring in enough money to keep us going. I could do it, Mother, I said, sitting up beside her. I could go fishing. Of course I could. Daniel would go with me, Mother. We'll take Father's boat out and we'll bring back all the fish you need. I've done it with Father often enough, haven't I? I know where to go, and Daniel can handle a boat as well as anyone. You know he can, Mother. No, I can't let you, Mother said, and Daniel's too young anyway. You're both too young to go out fishing alone. We'll manage, I expect. We'll be all right. When I get stronger, Gracie, we'll go out together. Please, Mother. No, Gracie, she said. It's out of the question. It's October already. Summertime, it would be different perhaps, but if you get out there this time of the year and the wind gets up, you'd not come back. We'd lose you and the boat, and then what would I tell your father when he comes back home? No, you're not doing it, Gracie. You hear me? It's too dangerous. But I knew there was no other way to find the money she needed, and I knew Daniel would need a little persuasion. The next evening, a still overcast evening with the sea the same soft grey as the sky, Daniel and I took out one of his father's boats. It was smaller than ours, a 14-foot lugger that Daniel thought we could handle more easily. We said nothing and told no one, for we knew they would forbid it. We waited until the beach was deserted and slid the boat out gently into the water. We set sail as soon as we were round the point and out of sight of the houses, and then made out past Samson round Droppy Nose Point towards Scilly Rock. Best place for pilchards, Daniel said. Father always says so. We'll be back before dark and no one will ever know we've gone. You can always tell your mother I caught them off the rocks, can't you? So we baited our hooks, let down the lines, and within half an hour we had caught more fish than we had ever dreamed of. 24 pilchard or more, and one large bass. We were fishing midway between Gweil and Scilly Rock. Perhaps it was the one big bass that tempted us to stay just a little longer to see if we could catch another even bigger. Whatever it was, we were so intent on our fishing that we never even noticed the weather coming in behind us. We were fishing with our backs to Scilly Rock on the open sea. The boat lolled beneath us, lapped by a listless sea. I just hooked my biggest pilchard when I noticed a wisp of mist above our heads. I looked around over my shoulder. Scilly Rock had vanished, and the sky and the sea as well. A grey wall of fog was rolling in towards us over the sea. There was nothing we could do, for it was already too late to do anything. It was over us and all around us before Daniel could even haul up his line. Gweil and Briar beyond it were not there anymore, and we were left alone and lost on a silent sea. What little breeze there was had gone, and we found ourselves quite becalmed. I remember we spoke in a whisper, as if the fog were a living creature that might be listening to us. I was not too worried, though, not at first, for the sea slapped so softly against the sides of the boat and seemed to hold no threat for us. Besides, I had Daniel with me. Both of us had been out in fog before, and both of us thought we knew the waters around Briar quite well enough to get home. As long as we keep Silly Rock astern of us, we can pull home easy enough, Daniel said softly. But how are we going to do that if we can't see it? I whispered, taking the oar he was handing me. I can't see it anymore. We can hear it though, can't we? He said. Listen. And I could hear the surge of the sea seething around Silly Rock, as it always did, even on the calmest of days. Hear it? He said. Just keep that sound astern of us, and we'll be able to feel our way home. Gweil must be dead ahead from here. There's no swell to speak of, so we won't go on the rocks. All we have to do is to hug the coast all the way round, and that'll bring us nicely into Popplestones. And so we began to row, only a few strokes at a time, stopping to listen for the sea around Silly Rock. It was not long before I began to think that Gweil was not at all where it should have been. We had already been rowing quite long enough and hard enough to have reached it by now. Then I thought that perhaps the current must have dragged us off course, and we must be somewhere between Samson and Briar. And I could still hear Silly Rock somewhere, astern of us and distant. But Daniel was no longer even sure of that. We pulled until our arms could pull no longer, but still no land loomed up out of the fog as we expected. Within half an hour, we had to admit to each other that we were quite lost. We sat over our oars and drifted, straining our ears for the wash of the sea against the rocks. Anything to give us some idea of where we were. The fog, though, seemed to obscure and shroud the sound of the sea, just as it was hiding the islands that we knew lay all around us. Even the piping of invisible oyster catchers was dulled and deadened as the dark came down through the fog and settled around us. Strange as it may seem, the darkness came as a kind of comfort to us, for at least it was the kind of blindness we were accustomed to. Even Daniel, who was never fond of the dark, seemed relieved at the onset of night. We searched now for some crack in the blackness about us, a glimmer of a light from the shore that would guide us safely home. We sat beside each other, huddled together and silent, the damp jibsail wrapped around us to keep out the cold, peering constantly into the impenetrable night and listening, always listening for the hiss of surf on the shingle or the distant muted charge of the waves against the cliffs. Often during that long, long night, our hopes were raised by the whisper of waves on some far shore, and we would row frantically towards it for a few minutes, and then sit silent and listen again, only to discover it had been nothing but wishful thinking, a trick of the mind. Either it was that, or we had simply been rowing the wrong way. We could never be sure of which. In this dense darkness, all sense of direction, time and space seemed to be distorted. Each time our hopes were raised only to be dashed, and each time the disappointment was all the more cruel and all the more lasting. The cold had numbed my feet up to my knees, and my hands could no longer feel the oar I was pulling. I wanted so much just to go to sleep, to give up and go to sleep, but Daniel would not let me. Got to keep moving, Gracie, he said. We don't know where we are, do we? We only know that we're cold and that we're going to get colder if we just sit here. So we're going to row. We're going to row till we warm up, and then we'll rest, and then we'll row again. We might be rowing out to sea, but at least we'll keep warm. We just can't sit here. And so we did. Daniel calling out the rhythm to keep us together. I discovered that night that you can sing almost everything there is to sing to the rhythm of the oars. That is, if you change the rhythm of the song. We were halfway through 10 Green Bottles for the second time when I saw the light and stopped rowing. It was a flickering prick of light, the kind you see when you close your eyes tight shut and look into the back of your eyelids. I did not believe it at first, for I did not want to be disappointed again. But when Daniel saw it too, I knew my eyes were not deceiving me. Then at last we heard the welcome sound of the sea running back over the sand. The boat beached even before we saw the shore, the bottom grating and growling to an abrupt halt in the surf. We jumped out and pulled her out as high as we could on the next wave, and then dropped the anchor into the sand. Both of us believed that we were on Popplestones until we discovered there were no pebbles above this line of sand, as there should have been. We found instead we were climbing in amongst dunes. Then hand in hand we were stumbling up through dead bracken and heather towards the light that shone in the sky ahead of us like some glowing orange moon as we approached it. Daniel stopped often to call out, "Is there anyone there? Anyone there?" But his voice was deadened by the fog-black night. Any echo stifled. I had only one reply, the single bark of a dog somewhere far away in the darkness. "Prince," I called out. "Is that you, Prince?" "You're imagining things," Daniel said. "It was nothing. I never heard anything. Come on, let's go up to that light." It was a long, painful climb. The sharp heather tore at my legs as I followed Daniel up the hillside. The dark shape of a cottage grew out of the gloom, and we ran towards it. But there was no door, no windows, and no roof. Just an empty shell was left, the walls, a fireplace at each end, and the window ledges. Through one of the windows, I could see the light flaring high above us. As we came out of the cottage and turned towards the light, our footsteps were suddenly loud in the night, crunching over what we found to be a mound of limpet shells. I thought at first that what I was hearing must be the freak echo of the crackling of the shells under our feet. But then I smelled the smoke, and I saw the first lick of orange flame flickering up into the blackness. Our light had become a great spitting beacon of fire, and we ran towards it, caring no longer now for our sore legs, and calling to whoever was up there. But no one was. The fire was a towering teepee of flame that was gradually falling on itself as we watched. The heat from it sent shivers of welcome warmth through our cold, aching bodies, and we jumped up and down in the light of it and laughed aloud of joy and relief. It was some time before we had warmed up enough to collect our thoughts and begin to worry again. We were sitting cross-legged upwind of the fire, revelling in its heat, when Daniel said, "Gracie, I don't think we're on Briar. I mean, do you know any cottage on Briar like that one we saw down there, and one without the roof? You seen one like that on Briar?" "Perhaps we're on Tresco then," I said. "Gracie," Daniel went on, breaking a stick and throwing it into the fire. "There's only one island where there's houses like that. Samson, Gracie. I think we've landed on Samson. Until then, I hadn't given a thought as to where we might have landed. I had not cared. I was just happy to be safe, alive, and warm again." "It can't be," I said, moving nearer to him. And as I looked around me, the darkness seemed to close in on us. "You sure?" I whispered. "I'm sure," he said.